The office was alive with the hum of ringing phones, the tapping of keyboards, and the murmur of executives discussing the latest business strategies. It was a space built on power and prestige, where every decision mattered, and success was measured by the dollar. At the top of this towering empire was Jonathan Hayes, the CEO, a man who had carefully crafted his reputation as a shrewd businessman, making ruthless choices that had propelled his company to unimaginable heights. His tall frame and sharp suit were enough to command attention when he entered a room. But it was his arrogance that truly held sway. He believed his success was purely the result of his own brilliance, and anyone who didn't meet his exacting standards was dispensable. Among the sea of perfect, polished employees was Clara, a young woman with a disability. She worked as an assistant, her small desk tucked away in the corner of the office. Despite the challenges she faced, Clara's dedication shone through in every task she took on. Her disability had never defined her work ethic. In fact, it fueled her desire to prove herself, to show that she was more than capable. But to Jonathan Hayes, Clara was just another employee, another cog in the machine that ran his company. His eyes rarely strayed in her direction, and when they did, it was with a look of indifference. She wasn't the type of person he valued, perfect in appearance, perfect in attitude. Her quiet resolve, her intelligence, and her exceptional organizational skills went unnoticed by the man who thought only of perfection and efficiency. For Jonathan, Clara was just another reminder that not everyone in his empire could keep up. And to him, that was a weakness. The pressure had been mounting for weeks. Jonathan Hayes was in the middle of a high-stakes business deal that could make or break his company. The investors were demanding results, and every decision needed to be flawless. The pressure weighed on him heavily, but what truly frustrated him was how things were unfolding with Clara. He had assigned her to handle some key administrative tasks for the deal, thinking it would be simple enough. Yet, every time he checked her progress, there were mistakes, small but noticeable. A missed email, a forgotten call, a scheduling error. Nothing huge, but enough to irritate him. Jonathan hated inefficiency. His empire was built on precision, on perfection, and Clara's disability seemed to be a constant reminder that not everyone could meet his high expectations. When the deal finally fell apart, due to a series of delays and miscommunications, it was the final straw. Jonathan seethed with frustration, the weight of the lost opportunity heavy on his shoulders. He didn't care to understand the reasons behind Clara's mistakes. All he could see was a liability, someone who wasn't keeping up with the pace he demanded. In his mind, her disability was holding her back, and that was unacceptable in his world. Without a second thought, Jonathan called her into his office. His expression was cold, his tone even colder. "Clara," he began, "I've made a decision. Your performance has been slipping, and frankly, I can't afford any more mistakes. Effective immediately, you're being let go." Clara's heart sank, but she didn't let the devastation show on her face. She had seen the writing on the wall for some time now. The dismissiveness, the lack of appreciation, the subtle hints that she wasn't living up to his expectations. It all pointed to this moment. As she packed up her desk, her hands trembled, but she held herself together. Every piece of paper, every book, every pen she placed in the box felt like a piece of her self-worth slipping away. She had worked so hard, given everything she had to this company, and yet it all came down to this. A decision made without empathy, without understanding. A decision based on her disability rather than her abilities. Jonathan didn't even look up from his desk as Clara left the office, her box of personal belongings clutched tightly in her hands. He was already moving on to the next task, focused on his next step in growing his empire. To him, it was just another employee gone. But to Clara, it felt like the world she had worked so hard to be a part of had turned its back on her. Weeks passed, and the world Jonathan Hayes had built, his empire of power and success, began to show cracks. The deal that had fallen through was only the beginning. Slowly, other problems started to emerge. Financial forecasts didn't match expectations, and a series of strategic missteps led to a sharp decline in profits. Investors were getting restless, and the pressure on Jonathan to turn things around was unbearable. For the first time in a long while, the CEO felt out of control. His usually smooth confidence wavered as the mounting pressure began to take its toll. Every morning, the weight of his decisions seemed heavier. Meetings with investors were growing increasingly tense. They were demanding answers, solutions, something to prove that Jonathan's empire wasn't on the verge of collapse. He found himself sitting in his office late into the night, papers scattered around him, trying to find the missing piece that would set everything right. But nothing seemed to work. Every new plan he implemented faltered, and the numbers kept slipping further into the red. He had always been able to rely on his sharp instincts, but now his once reliable decision-making was failing him. In the midst of this chaos, it dawned on Jonathan, something that he hadn't considered in the whirlwind of his own arrogance. He had fired Clara. She had been the one person in the office who was always reliable, always focused, always there when he needed her. She had known the company inside and out, understood the systems that kept things running smoothly. Even though she didn't fit his image of a perfect employee, Clara had been a quiet force behind the scenes. Now, Jonathan found himself in a corner, struggling to find answers, and Clara was the one person who could have helped him. She knew the inner workings of the business better than anyone else. In a moment of rare humility, Jonathan realized that her disability had never been the problem. His blind pursuit of perfection and his own pride had been. The regret began to gnaw at him, a bitter taste he couldn't shake. If only he hadn't let her go. If only he had seen her potential beyond the limitations he had imagined. He didn't know how to fix this, but one thing was clear. He needed Clara, now more than ever. The morning sunlight filtered through Jonathan's office windows, but it did little to chase away the dark cloud of regret that hung over him. Desperation had driven him to a decision he never thought he'd make. He had to reach out to Clara. There was no other choice. His team, though capable, was simply not enough to turn the tide. The only person who had the knowledge, the skill, and the experience to help him was the one he had dismissed not long ago. He had underestimated her, and now, with everything on the line, he was willing to admit it. With shaky hands, Jonathan picked up his phone and composed the message. "Clara, I need your help. Things have changed, and I know I made a mistake. Please, let's meet." He hesitated before hitting send. Would she even agree to help him after how he treated her? Would she forgive him for firing her so callously? The thought of facing her again, knowing what he had done, sent a pang of guilt through him. But there was no other option left. The company was faltering, and if he couldn't find a solution, everything he had built would crumble. Clara's response came hours later, and Jonathan could feel the weight of her words, even through a simple text. "I'll meet you, but don't expect me to make things easy." Jonathan exhaled, feeling a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. She was willing to give him a chance, but only because she could see an opportunity for herself in this situation. She was no longer the assistant who quietly supported the team. Now, she was in a position of power, the one with the knowledge and skills Jonathan so desperately needed. The day of their meeting arrived. Jonathan, still in his sharp suit, sat behind his desk, trying to gather his thoughts. Clara walked into the room, her presence steady and calm. She was no longer the woman who had left the office carrying a box of her belongings. Now, she stood tall, and the air between them felt charged with the tension of unspoken words. As they sat down to talk, Jonathan could feel the weight of his past mistakes pressing on him. But Clara, though calm on the surface, couldn't shake her own uncertainty. Was this truly a chance to help turn things around, or was Jonathan simply desperate, using her as a last resort? The tension between them grew as they began discussing the company's issues. Clara's expertise was clear, but her hesitation was just as apparent. She knew Jonathan hadn't changed overnight. Could she trust him again? Could she let go of the hurt of being discarded like an afterthought? The answers would come soon enough. But neither of them knew yet if this collaboration would be a redemption story or a disaster waiting to unfold. As the days passed, Clara and Jonathan worked side by side, navigating the company's troubles. Jonathan, ever the strategist, had long been accustomed to leading with authority, but now he found himself relying on Clara's expertise more and more. She approached the company's problems with calm precision, dissecting the issues that had sent the business into decline. She had a way of looking at things from angles he had never considered, something he had once dismissed as insignificant. But now, it was her insight that was the key to pulling them out of the mess. Clara threw herself into the work with relentless focus, using her skills to develop solutions and build a strategy to get the company back on track. She didn't hesitate, even when faced with the massive task of mending a broken organization. The more she worked, the clearer it became that she was more than capable, more than just someone who had been dismissed. But despite her dedication, the wounds of the past still lingered, and every meeting with Jonathan was a reminder of how easily he had thrown her away. Jonathan, meanwhile, was slowly learning what he had missed all along. As he observed Clara, he saw a depth to her abilities that went far beyond what he had initially given her credit for. Her disability had never been the problem. It was his narrow view of success that had kept him from recognizing her true value. He watched as she led meetings, negotiated with investors, and made decisions with confidence, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of genuine respect for her. He began to question his earlier actions, his decision to fire her, his belief that perfection was the only way forward. How could he have been so blind? But Jonathan's pride was a difficult thing to overcome. He still struggled with the idea of admitting that he had made a mistake, and there were moments when his old arrogance resurfaced. His discomfort at needing Clara was palpable, and he struggled to relinquish control. Clara noticed it, the way he would sometimes take credit for decisions that were clearly hers, the way his tone would shift whenever he felt his authority being challenged. Tension hung in the air between them, unspoken yet undeniable. For Clara, the hardest part was deciding whether to forgive him. There were days when she wanted to turn away and walk out, to walk away from the pain of being discarded so easily. But she knew that if she did, she would be leaving not just her past behind, but an opportunity to prove to herself and to Jonathan that she was more than what he had once seen her as. Forgiveness wasn't easy, and she wasn't sure if she could give it so easily. She had to trust again, but after everything, trust was not something she could hand over without thought. The day of the critical business presentation had finally arrived. It was the deal Jonathan had been working toward for months, the one that could secure the company's future and restore the faith of investors. Every decision, every word, mattered. He knew that without Clara's expertise, the presentation would fall apart. She had spent weeks preparing the data, fine-tuning the strategy, and making sure everything was perfect. Her meticulous attention to detail was what had brought them this far. But now, with the stakes higher than ever, Jonathan was relying on her completely. As the hours ticked down to the presentation, Clara found herself standing in front of the mirror, conflicted. She had worked tirelessly to make this day a success, but the lingering doubt in her mind made her question everything. Could she truly trust Jonathan again after all that had happened? After he had discarded her without a second thought? It was difficult to forget the hurt, the betrayal. She had been willing to let go of her anger for the sake of the company. But now, standing on the verge of the biggest moment of their collaboration, she wasn't sure she could fully let down her guard. Jonathan had tried his best to lead, but Clara could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't the confident CEO she had once known. There was a vulnerability in him now, a softness that made her wonder whether it was genuine or just a fleeting moment of desperation. He looked to her for guidance, his reliance on her now clear, and for a split second she saw the man who had fired her, the man who had pushed her aside, and her anger flared. Could he really be trusted? Just as the meeting was about to begin, an urgent call came in. Jonathan's face drained of color as he listened to the news. An outside competitor had launched an aggressive move, threatening to steal their clients and jeopardize their entire project. The timing was catastrophic. The investors were already in the conference room, waiting for the presentation, and now this new threat loomed over them like a storm cloud. Jonathan turned to Clara, panic in his eyes. "We need to act fast. We have to stop them before it's too late." There was no time for hesitation. The company's future depended on it, and in that moment, Clara realized that they had to put everything aside: old grudges, pride and doubts. They had to work together. The tension between them was palpable, but there was no room for ego now. Clara and Jonathan looked at each other, and without another word, they moved into action. With the clock ticking, they set their differences aside, both of them fully aware that the only way to succeed was through collaboration. The company's survival was at stake, and the time for personal issues was over. Together, they would face the unexpected threat and fight to save the business, if they could, in time. The crisis was finally over. The threat to the company had been neutralized, and Jonathan and Clara's quick, decisive actions had saved the day. The investors were impressed, the competitors had been thwarted, and for the first time in a long while, Jonathan felt a genuine sense of relief. But amidst the chaos, there was something even more important that had shifted, something he couldn't ignore. Late that afternoon, after the dust had settled, Jonathan asked Clara to meet him in his office. She walked in, her posture still confident, but her eyes carried the weight of the challenges they had just overcome. As she took a seat across from him, Jonathan stared at her, his mind working through everything that had transpired. "Clara," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I owe you an apology. I've made so many mistakes. When I fired you, I was blind to what you truly brought to this company, to what you bring to the world. I let my pride get in the way, and I hurt you." Clara listened, her heart still carrying the weight of the past, but she knew this was the moment. Jonathan wasn't just offering an apology, he was showing something much more valuable: humility. His eyes were sincere, and in that moment, she saw a different man. "I was wrong," he continued. "You were always capable, always more than I gave you credit for, and I'll never make that mistake again." Clara took a deep breath, her anger and hurt from the past not entirely gone, but softened. "It's taken me a long time to get here, but I've proven that no one should be underestimated, no matter their circumstances," she said quietly. As the conversation came to a close, Clara stood up, now in a higher position within the company, an equal partner to Jonathan. The respect between them was no longer one-sided. They had both learned valuable lessons. Jonathan had learned humility, and Clara had proven that true strength comes from within. The journey had been difficult, but it had brought them to a place of mutual understanding and respect. As they exchanged a look of unspoken acknowledgement, they knew that they were no longer the people they had been when they first started. The future looked brighter now, for both of them. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more heartfelt, emotional journeys like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. If the story resonated with you, like this video, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you think someone else could benefit from this message, please share it with your friends. Your support means the world to us and helps us create even more incredible stories for you. Thank you for watching.